Welcome to the Facilitators Deep Dive Podcast, your podcast on your way to facilitation mastery.
Welcome to our deep dive. We're going to be looking at self-organized teams.
A very relevant topic.
Yeah, and it seems like it's becoming more and more important all the time these days. We're looking at the book Leading Self-Organized Teams, the third edition by Siegfried Kaltenecker.
Yes.
And we're going to kind of go through some of the key concepts in the book and hopefully give you some good takeaways for yourself, no matter kind of where you are in your career or what your role is.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. The book starts off talking about self-organization in nature and society. And the first thing that they talk about is ants.
Yeah.
Have you ever thought about ants?
All the time.
Really?
Yeah. Ants are a great example of what we call emergence. So very simple rules can lead to very complex behavior. Like if you think about an ant colony, they can find the shortest path to food, or they could build these incredibly complex structures.
Right.
Without any kind of central planning or control, it all emerges from the interactions of the individual ants.
And they're not sitting there with blueprints. They're not.
Exactly.
They're not like little architects with tiny little blueprints.
Exactly.
It just kind of happens.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
That is fascinating. And then they talk about the Torre de David in Caracas, which is an unfinished skyscraper.
Right.
That people just moved into.
Yeah, it's a fascinating story. It was supposed to be this luxury high-rise.
Oh, wow.
But the project was abandoned, and so you have this sort of skeleton of a building.
And it's huge.
It's massive, yeah.
Like 45 stories or something?
Yeah, something like that. And people just started moving in. And over time, they created this sort of self-governing community. They have shops, they have services. They even have like a little gym in there.
Right.
And it's a testament to the human capacity for self-organization.
Yeah.
Even in the absence of formal structures or authority, people can come together and create something really remarkable.
And that's even without like any kind of overall plan.
Yeah, exactly. It's very organic.
So that kind of sets the stage, I guess, for looking at, self-organization in terms of a business setting or something like that. Like, how do we take those principles and apply them in a more intentional way?
Yeah.
So the book then goes on to talk about, why are we even talking about self-organized teams? Like, what's the need? What's driving this?
Yeah, and I think the biggest driver is the increasing complexity of the world we live in. We have all these political shifts, economic crises, rapid technological advancements. It's just constant change.
Right.
And traditional top-down management structures, they just weren't built for this level of complexity.
It's like they break down, right? They don't function well in that kind of environment.
Exactly. They become too slow. They're too rigid.
Right.
They can't adapt quickly enough. And so you end up with this situation where management is kind of relying on probabilities and sometimes making random decisions.
Like throwing darts at a dartboard and hoping something sticks.
Pretty much, yeah.
Yep.
And the alternative is to empower the people who are closest to the customer, the people who are actually doing the work, to make decisions, to learn, and to adapt.
Right. And so that's where the concept of self-organization comes into play.
Exactly.
And the book talks about a soccer team as an analogy.
Yeah.
So you have the players on the field, and they're not constantly looking to the coach for every single move they make.
Right.
They're using their own judgment based on the situation at hand.
Exactly. They understand the overall strategy the coach has given them the training, and they trust each other to make the right decisions in the moment.
But the coach is still important, right? I mean, it's not like they just go out there and do whatever they want.
Oh, absolutely. The coach sets the context. They define the overall strategy. They provide the training. They create the environment for the team to succeed.
Right.
But they don't micromanage every single play.
Okay, so that's a really good analogy, I think, because you can kind of see that on the field, right? Like you see the players communicating with each other. They're making adjustments. They're adapting to the flow of the game.
Yeah.
So how does that translate to a business setting?
Well, it's about distributing leadership.
Yeah.
Instead of having one person at the top calling all the shots,
Right.
you empower team members to take ownership, to make decisions, and to lead in their own areas of expertise.
Right.
But of course, this requires a high level of trust and transparency. You need clear goals, you need clear roles and responsibilities, and you need open communication.
Okay, so we've established why self-organized teams are important, especially in today's complex world.
Yeah.
But what makes them successful? Like, what are the key ingredients that separate the high-performing teams from the ones that struggle?
The book identifies 4 core values, and these are really important.
Okay.
Commitment, simplicity, respect, and courage. These values, they shape how team members perceive situations and guide their actions.
So let's break those down a little bit, because I think those are pretty broad terms.
Yeah, sure.
Like, what do we mean by commitment?
Well, the book tells this great story about a boy on a beach that's covered in starfish, and he's throwing them back into the sea one by one. And a woman walks by and asks him, "What difference does it make? There are thousands of them."
Right.
And the boy replies, "It makes a difference to this one." And he throws another starfish back in the water.
I like that.
Yeah, it's a powerful reminder that even small actions can make a difference, especially when we're truly committed to something.
Right. So it's not just about showing up. It's about that sense of ownership, that sense of responsibility.
Exactly.
Okay, what about simplicity? Why is that important?
Well, simplicity is all about focusing on what truly matters and eliminating unnecessary complexity.
Okay.
And the book highlights a principle called the prime directive, which is borrowed from Star Trek.
Really? Star Trek.
Yeah.
I love it.
So it's the idea that everyone is doing the best they can with the information and resources available to them at the time.
So you assume positive intent.
Exactly.
And you focus on learning from mistakes rather than assigning blame.
Right.
Okay.
Because when people feel safe to experiment and to fail, they're more likely to innovate and to come up with creative solutions.
That makes sense. So what about respect? Why is that important in a self-organized team?
Well, respect is important in any team, but it becomes even more crucial when you have a group of individuals who are empowered to make decisions and share leadership responsibilities. The book has an example of a Scrum expert who failed to respect the experience of traditional project managers.
Oh, I bet that didn't go well.
It didn't. It created resistance and tension and ultimately undermined the entire initiative.
Makes sense. You have to value everyone's perspective and experience.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And you need to create an environment where everyone feels safe to speak up and to share their ideas.
Okay, so what about courage?
Well, courage in this context is about speaking up, about challenging the status quo, and taking ownership of decisions. It's about being willing to experiment, even if it means making mistakes along the way.
Right.
Because, in a self-organized team, you don't have someone telling you exactly what to do, so you have to be willing to step up, to take risks, and to learn from your failures.
Right. And that can be scary for some people.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so we have these 4 values: commitment, simplicity, respect, courage.
Yes.
And they all kind of work together, right? You can't really have one without the others.
Exactly. They're interconnected. They reinforce each other.
Okay.
And together they create a foundation for trust, collaboration, and continuous improvement.
Okay, so we've got these values, but at the end of the day, I mean, a team has to deliver something right.
Right?
So how do we make sure that a self-organized team is actually delivering the right things, delivering value?
That's where focusing on customer value comes into play. And the book dives into lean methodology as a framework for achieving that.
Okay, so can you give our listener a quick rundown of what lean methodology is and how it can be applied to self-organized teams?
Sure. Lean methodology is all about identifying the value stream, optimizing flow, and continuously improving. It emphasizes eliminating waste, empowering teams to make decisions close to the work, and delivering value to the customer as quickly and efficiently as possible.
Okay.
But to do that effectively, you have to start by really understanding your customers and what they truly value.
So ask yourself, who are your customers?
Yeah.
What are their needs?
Right.
How can you ensure that your team's work aligns with those needs?
Exactly.
And then how can you do that with as little waste as possible?
Right. Minimizing waste is key.
Okay, so speaking of waste, what kind of waste are we talking about here? Like, what are some examples of things that can hinder a team's progress?
Well, the book uses this great analogy of a mountain stream,
Okay.
providing water to a village. Any obstruction in that stream, any diversion, is going to hinder the flow of water.
Right.
Similarly, things like overworked task switching, bottlenecks, bureaucratic processes, all of these create waste and hinder the flow in a team's workflow.
So it's about identifying those obstructions, those diversions, and figuring out how to remove them, how to streamline the process.
Exactly.
Are there any specific techniques or tools that teams can use to do that?
Well, visualizing work processes can be incredibly helpful.
Okay.
Tools like Kanban boards can really help teams see the flow of work and identify any bottlenecks. And there's this great anecdote in the book from Mary and Tom Popendiek about losing keys.
Losing keys. What does that have to do with business?
Well, it highlights the importance of early feedback.
Okay.
The longer you wait to get feedback, the bigger the problem becomes. So like if you realize you've lost your keys right away, you could retrace your steps and find them quickly.
Right.
But if you wait a week, it's going to be a lot harder.
That's a good point. So it's about catching those mistakes early on.
Exactly.
Whether it's in software development or any other kind of project. Okay, so let's shift gears a bit. Let's say I'm a leader and I want to create an environment that fosters self-organization within my team. How do I do that?
Well, design thinking can be a really helpful framework for that. It's an iterative, customer-centric approach to problem solving that really prioritizes experimentation and learning.
Okay, so it's about creating a space where it's safe to try things out, to learn from mistakes, and to adapt along the way.
Exactly.
And of course, you want to keep the customer's needs at the center of everything.
Absolutely.
Now, don't we also need some sort of decision-making framework, though? I mean, otherwise, won't it just be chaos?
Yeah, you're right. The book talks about the consultative decision process, where individuals are encouraged to gather input from stakeholders and experts before making a decision. So you're not just making decisions in isolation, you're seeking diverse perspectives and making more informed choices.
Okay, so you're consulting with people, but ultimately someone has to make the decision.
Right.
So is it always the same person, or does that rotate, or how does that work?
Well, it depends on the team and the situation.
Okay.
But the key is that everyone understands the process and who has the authority to make which decisions.
Okay, that makes sense. So with all this talk about self-organization, I'm sure some listeners are thinking, wait a minute, are we saying that managers are going to become obsolete?
That's a common question, and it's a valid concern. But the answer is no. Leadership is more crucial than ever in a self-organized environment. It's just that the role of the manager shifts from command and control to something we call post-heroic leadership.
Post-heroic leadership. I like that. So what does that mean?
It's about relinquishing control, delegating, effectively embracing vulnerability. It means shifting from a mindset of, I have all the answers, to let's figure this out together. So managers become facilitators and coaches rather than dictators. They create the conditions for teams to thrive by providing support guidance and removing obstacles.
And I imagine communication becomes even more important in this kind of setting.
Absolutely. Communication is the lifeblood of any team, but it's especially crucial for self-organized teams.
So what specific communication skills do you think are essential for success in this type of environment?
Well, active listening is paramount. It's about truly hearing and understanding what others are saying, not just waiting for your turn to speak. And then when you do speak, it's about being clear, concise, and direct.
Okay, so being both a good listener and a good communicator. And are there specific types of meetings or communication formats that work particularly well for self-organized teams?
Yeah, the book talks about several different types of meetings that can be really effective.
Okay.
Planning meetings, daily stand-ups, reviews, and retrospectives.
Those sound kind of familiar, but I'm guessing they function a little bit differently in a self-organized context.
Yeah, they definitely have a different flavor.
We're just about out of time for this first part of our deep dive, but maybe we can explore those different meeting formats in the next part.
Absolutely.
And we can also talk about some other practical applications of self-organization. So stay tuned for part 2 of our deep dive.
Yeah, it's going to be good.
Welcome back to our deep dive into self-organized teams. Last time we were talking about, those core values and the idea of post-heroic leadership and all that.
Right.
And I thought it was interesting that right at the end, we kind of touched on different types of meetings.
Yeah.
Things like planning meetings, stand-up meetings, reviews, and retrospectives. So I'd love to kind of dig into that a little bit more. Like, how do those actually play out in a self-organized environment?
Okay, yeah, let's start with planning meetings.
Okay.
I mean, in a traditional setting, you might have a manager who's, dictating the plan, assigning tasks.
Right.
But in a self-organized team, the planning process is much more collaborative. The team really works together to define the scope of the work, estimate the effort to identify any potential risks or dependencies.
Right. It's more about that shared ownership and accountability, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, so what about those daily stand-up meetings? I've heard a lot about those.
Yeah, stand-up meetings are great for staying aligned and keeping the work flowing smoothly. They're usually pretty short, focused gatherings.
Okay.
And team members share what they're working on, what they've accomplished, and any roadblocks they're facing.
So it's like a quick check-in just to make sure everybody's on the same page?
Exactly. And, the stand-up part isn't just a catchy name.
Oh, really?
Often teams literally stand up during these meetings.
Wow.
Just to kind of keep it brief and energetic.
Okay. I like that. I can see how that would help keep things moving. So we've talked about planning. We've talked about those daily check-ins. What about reviews? How do those work differently in a self-organized team?
Well, reviews in a self-organized setting are less about, you know, formal presentations
Right.
and more about demonstrating progress, gathering feedback, making adjustments along the way.
Okay.
So it's very much about transparency and continuous improvement.
So it's not like you wait until the very end and then you have this big presentation and that's it.
Right. It's much more iterative and collaborative than that.
Okay. What about retrospectives? Are those helpful in a self-organized team?
Yeah, retrospectives are really valuable. They're a chance for the team to take a step back and examine, what's working well, what could be improved.
Right.
They get together, they discuss what went well, what didn't, what can they learn from their experiences. It's all about continuous learning and improvement.
Yeah, I like that. And it seems like that kind of feedback loop would be really helpful in a self-organized team because you don't necessarily have that manager who's always providing that feedback.
Right, exactly.
Now, we've been talking about these, different types of meetings, but are there times when a team needs something more than just, a regular meeting? Like, what about those large-scale events?
Oh, yeah. Large-scale events are really powerful tools,
Okay.
for aligning teams, fostering collaboration, and, tackling those big, complex challenges that really require, input from multiple teams or stakeholders.
So what are we talking about here? Like workshops, conferences, team building activities?
Yeah, all of those things. And these kinds of events can be especially helpful when you're, launching a new initiative or navigating a major change or just needing to re-energize and reconnect as a team.
Right. It's like bringing everybody together, create that shared understanding, build relationships, generate some momentum.
Exactly.
Now, I imagine planning a large-scale event can be pretty daunting, especially for a team that's used to working in a more self-directed way.
Yeah, it can be a big undertaking, but the key is to start with a clear purpose and a desired outcome.
Okay. So you really need to know, like, why are we doing this? What do we want to get out of it?
Yeah. Ask yourself, what are you hoping to achieve with this event? What are the key questions that you want to answer?
Right.
Once you have that clarity, then you can design the event around those goals.
Okay, so the same principles of, intentionality and clarity apply even on a larger scale.
Right.
But I'm guessing the logistics are a little bit more complex when you're dealing with, a larger group of people.
Yeah, for sure. You're going to need to think about things like facilitation, creating an engaging and interactive experience.
Okay.
And then, of course, practical logistics like venue, timing, materials, all of that.
Right. But it sounds like it's important to not get so bogged down in the details that you lose sight of the big picture.
Yeah, absolutely. The goal is to create an environment that fosters collaboration, innovation, a sense of shared purpose.
Right. Finding
Yeah.
that balance between structure and spontaneity.
Exactly.
Okay. Now, we've talked a lot about, the ideal scenario, but let's face it, change is rarely easy.
Right.
I mean, organizations and individuals often face resistance when they're trying to transition to a more self-organized way of working. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think one of the biggest mistakes that organizations make is trying to change everything all at once.
Right.
It's much more effective to start small and iterate.
Okay.
Identify a specific area or a team where you can pilot a self-organized approach.
Right. Kind of dip your toes in the water.
Yeah, exactly. And then learn from that experience.
Okay, so it's about taking those baby steps and building momentum over time.
Right.
But what about those individuals who are, particularly resistant to change? Like, how do you bring them along?
Well, I think the first step is to try to understand the root of that resistance.
Yeah.
Are people afraid of losing control?
Right.
Do they feel like they lack the necessary skills or knowledge? Once you understand those concerns, then you can address them directly.
Right. So it's about empathy and communication, meeting people where they are.
Yeah.
But I imagine there are always going to be some people who are just, fundamentally opposed to this way of working.
You're right. Not everyone will be on board immediately, and that's okay.
Okay.
I think it's important to be patient, persistent, and to continue to communicate the vision and the benefits of self-organization.
Right.
But sometimes, it's just about accepting that some people might thrive in a different environment.
Okay.
It's a journey, not a destination.
Yeah, it's about finding that right fit for the individual and the organization. We've covered a lot of ground in this part of our deep dive, from specific meeting formats to the challenges of change management.
Right.
I'm kind of eager to hear more about, those personal skills and mindset shifts that are needed to really thrive in a self-organized environment. Like, how can I, as an individual, grow and adapt to this way of working?
Yeah, that's a great point. And it's a crucial aspect of this whole self-organization journey.
Okay.
So in the next part, I think we should shift our focus to those personal skills and explore how individuals can develop the self-awareness, the communication skills, and that collaborative spirit that's really needed to succeed in a self-organized team.
Sounds good.
We'll also talk about some of the challenges that people often face and offer some practical tips for overcoming them.
Stay tuned for part 3. So welcome back to our deep dive on self-organized teams. And, we've been talking about all this stuff like, changing structures and processes and everything, but it seems like there's also a really big personal component to this whole thing.
Oh, absolutely. Self-organization, it really does require a shift in mindset and also, the development of some new skills.
So what are some of those, personal qualities that you think are really essential for individuals to thrive in this type of environment?
Well, one of the most important is self-awareness.
Okay.
It's about really understanding your strengths and weaknesses, your values and motivations, and how your actions impact others.
It's kind of like taking a step back and looking at yourself objectively.
Exactly. And being able to, honestly reflect on your own behavior and make adjustments as needed.
Right. And I imagine that can be pretty challenging.
Oh, yeah. Especially for people who are used to that more traditional, top-down management style.
Right. Because you're kind of used to having someone else tell you what to do and how to do it.
Right. Exactly.
So how do you make that shift to becoming more self-aware?
Well, it takes courage to be vulnerable and to admit that you don't have all the answers. But that vulnerability is really essential for building trust.
Right.
And, fostering true collaboration in a self-organized team.
And, I remember the book talked about a couple of tools that can be helpful for this, things like personal retrospectives and energy checks. Can you kind of remind our listener about those?
Yeah. So personal retrospectives, they're kind of like a team retrospective, but you're doing it for yourself. So, you take some time to reflect on your work.
Okay.
Ask yourself, what went well? What could have gone better? What did I learn?
Right.
What will I do differently next time? It's basically creating a feedback loop for your own personal growth.
Right.
And then energy checks, there's super simple way to kind of, gauge your energy levels throughout the day. Yeah. So you can just use, a scale of 1 to 10. Rate your energy at different points. And, if you notice a dip, you take a moment to kind of explore why. Are you feeling overwhelmed? Do you need a break?
Right.
Are you working on something that's draining your energy? By becoming more aware of your energy levels, you can take steps to recharge.
Okay. So it's kind of like a self-care thing, but it also benefits the team, ultimately.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. So besides self-awareness, what other, personal skills do you think are really important for succeeding in a self-organized team?
Well, communication, collaboration, problem solving, all crucial.
Yeah.
But it's not just about having those skills in isolation. It's about how you apply them in a self-organized context.
Right. So can you give our listeners some examples of, what that might look like in practice?
Yeah. So for communication, it's really about active listening, truly hearing and understanding what others are saying, not just waiting for your turn to speak. And then when you do speak, being clear, concise, and, expressing your perspective openly and honestly.
So it's kind of a two-way street there.
Yeah.
Being a good listener and a good communicator.
Right.
What about collaboration? How does that play out differently in a self-organized environment?
Well, it requires a willingness to really, work together towards that common goal, to share responsibility, to support each other. It's about recognizing that, everyone brings something valuable to the table and that the team's success depends on everyone's contributions.
Okay. And problem solving, what about that?
Problem solving in a self-organized team, it's much more of a collective and iterative approach. So instead of relying on, a single expert to come up with a solution,
right,
the team works together, to identify the root cause of the problem, brainstorm potential solutions experiment until they find something that works.
So it sounds like it requires, a lot of trust in each other and in the team's kind of collective wisdom.
It does, yeah.
And a willingness to kind of embrace uncertainty.
So all of this sounds great in theory, but let's be real for a minute.
Yeah.
Self-organization isn't always easy. What are some of the challenges that, people might face as they're trying to kind of adapt to this new way of working?
Well, fear of the unknown is a big one.
Okay.
Self-organization It represents a departure from those familiar structures and processes that people are used to. And it can be intimidating to kind of step outside that comfort zone.
Yeah, it's like stepping off a cliff and hoping there's a net to catch you.
Exactly. And sometimes that net might feel a little flimsy at first.
Right.
But, with practice, with support from your team, and a willingness to learn, you'll develop the confidence and skills you need to navigate this new terrain.
Okay, so what are some other challenges that people might bump into?
Well, conflict's another one.
Okay.
When you have a group of people who are empowered to make decisions, to voice their opinions, disagreements are bound to happen.
Right, that's natural.
So the key is to address those conflicts directly and respectfully.
Encourage open communication, active listening. Focus on finding solutions that work for everyone.
So it's not about avoiding conflict. It's about kind of using it as an opportunity to grow.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And, conflict, when handled well, it can actually be a catalyst for creativity and innovation.
Okay, good point. Any other potential pitfalls we should watch out for?
Burnout.
Okay, yeah, I can see that happening.
Especially, in the early stages when you're transitioning to this model, self-organized teams, they're often very passionate and driven. But, sustainable high performance, it requires balance.
It's like running a marathon. You can't just sprint the whole way.
Exactly.
You got to pace yourself.
So, yeah, encourage self-care, set healthy boundaries, and celebrate successes along the way. Self-organization is not about working harder. It's about working smarter.
Right.
And creating a more sustainable and fulfilling way to work together.
Well, this has been fantastic. I've learned so much about self-organized teams.
It's been fun. Yeah.
We talked about the underlying principles, some practical techniques, and, those personal skills that are so important for thriving in this new way of working. So I hope our listener got a lot out of it.
Me too.
And, if you're interested in learning more, I highly recommend checking out the book that we were talking about, Leading Self-Organized Teams by Siegfried Kaltnecker.
Yeah, it's a great resource.
Lots of great stuff in there. And remember, self-organization, it's not a destination, it's a journey. Embrace the challenges, celebrate the successes, and, never stop learning and growing, both individually and as a team.
And who knows, you might just discover that, the future of work is more collaborative, more fulfilling, and more human-centered than you ever imagined.
Yeah, well said. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, and we'll see you next time.
See you next time on the Facilitators Deep Dive Podcast, your podcast on your way to facilitation mastery. Until next time.
See you then.